Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach. Going to discuss a little bit of SuperCoach. Once again, we're going to talk a bit of the forward line. Bear with me, I am still struggling with a little bit of a cold, so Shorty's a little bit under the weather. But nonetheless, I wanted to get a bit of forward line discussion. And I don't know about you, but I've been looking at the forward line and just not really knowing what to think. I think it's pretty simple at the top. You've got Dangerfield and Heaney, who are out and out locks. I think they're just clearly no-brainers. But then the rest is very, very difficult. And often the forward line, we have a few mid-forwards that we have a reasonable amount of confidence in, but there just feels to me like there's a lot of uncertainty about who could be the top 4, 5 or 6 forwards come year's end. And I'm feeling, fairly difficult about finding my F3 and an F4. Do we go that deep? And in contrast to the back line, and often these roles are reversed, often the back line can prove a little tricky and the forward line might bat a little deeper or offer us a little bit more confidence at the start of the season. But, I'm looking at the back line, I'm looking Lloyd, Laird, Sicily, Simpson, Whitfield, Williams, all really, really confident that they are going to deliver really good seasons. And look, even Witherden, I'm really big on. And I think that's when I talk about this forward line and the certainty, I think that know what you're going to get factor just isn't quite there with a lot of the players. There's a lot of uncertainty about position, or maybe they have been reliable but they're getting older, they're past their peak. I think when I'm looking at positions and players, I like to pick a guy who's either in his prime or coming into it, or someone that you just feel reliable and confident with when you're picking that selection straight off the top for your opening side. So I want to go through a few of these forwards, and it might help you because obviously I'm doing the profiles as well, but it might give you an insight to what I'm thinking about some other guys. Hopefully the video doesn't drag along too much, but I'll just be going down in terms of the price from the very top of all the guys who averaged 90 last year. So if you're interested about someone who maybe averaged around that 90 mark, maybe skip forward a little bit if you want to hear what I think about, maybe a Kelly or a McLean or something like that. And I will discuss a few players after that list that I think offer a little bit of, some a point of difference, and others are in my side, and others I just think might be the guys perhaps we look at, given there isn't a stack of confidence with a few others. And when I talk about that, as I said, I think Dangerfield and Heaney should be in absolutely every side. Then you've got Hawkins. I can't see many people picking him. Unbelievable season, but really extremely risky to go with him at that price. Westhoff, I think if you like him, you're going with him in the ruck. Personally, I see an average more around the high 80s, early 90s, which I don't think is enough for either position. Franklin, been such a good warrior for years gone by, just an amazing entertainer, produced absolutely massive scores, can get the odd low one. Look, I haven't sung his praises for some time, and he keeps on keeping on, even though it hasn't quite been at his 3-figure best. But surely at some point, we're going to see a few more of the lower scores from Buddy and less of the absolute 130 plus stuff. So I think he's got a bit of risk. Menegola, probably one of the more, better options in terms of this list. I think Geelong will offer him a bit more midfield time. I think Ablett and Selwood are going to be out of the midfield a little bit more, and I even think Dalhouse will play more so forward. But again, it's uncertainty. We're going to have to see what we get through the pre-season for Menegola. Devon Smith, copped an injury the other week. I'm concerned about him anyway. I just think he served us so well last year. Was one of my better picks for the season. But, amazing tackling numbers. And just last year just screams career best season. I mean, I just don't know whether he gets better than that. Can he replicate it? It's just my opinion. I know he's been pretty popular. The percentages say so, but I've just got my concerns. I mean, he's only done, real premium stuff for one season, and it just had all the right ingredients. New club, just got up and about, was just dominant. I just have my concerns whether he can replicate it. Again, it's being picky, but I'm not going to start with him. Tom McDonald, surely not. Robbie Gray, fairly popular. I think he's in about 12 or 13% of sides, but please. I mean, the bloke is so injury prone in the latter stage of his career. If he was playing midfield, then sure, but looks like Ollie Wines will be back, maybe a month or so into the season, maybe earlier. I could not start with him. Jack Gunston, really, is he going to play back? Is he going to play forward? I think he plays both of them pretty well. You'd imagine forward, but I think he's the sort of guy that, again, we've seen his best football. He's probably going to be a solid mid-90s sort of guy, but it's just not sexy enough for me. I don't know. When I look at these guys, some of them just seem like vanilla selections. There seems minimal upside in some of them, and others that I see the upside, there's a bit of uncertainty around position. So I guess that's in a nutshell. Mundy, I don't think we could go him. I know Neil is out of the side, going to Brisbane, and Blakely's injured and stuff like that, but surely his fantasy days are behind him. Bruce, you couldn't start with him. Dunkley's a guy that I think many will consider. I'm considering him strongly. But again, we need to see pre-season games to define where his position's going to be. And will it be through the middle? One would think, because he ended the season like an absolute rocket. He's got to be the pick of this list, one would imagine. Toby McLean I quite like as well. But the Dogs, they bat pretty deep. Without having superstars through that midfield, they have a lot of guys who can run through there, and Beveridge has done that over the journey, put quite a few different guys in there. So I feel like either Dunkley or McLean could be a really strong pick. But again, at this stage of the year, before pre-season games, it's just got me scratching my head a little bit. Tim Kelly concerns me as well. I think he'll get opportunity at the Cats through the midfield, no doubt about it, but the bloke wants to leave. I know his first season was unbelievable, but to pick a guy, pay this amount of coin, who wants to leave, and he's only done it for one season, again, there's a lot of concerns about that. The fact that he's a pure mid, extremely appealing, because I look through this list and I don't know if there's a guy that you could say is definitely a pure midfielder. Kelly won't be playing anywhere else, so that's extremely appealing. But just a couple of those other factors. I mean, he's only played, 20-odd games and wants to go home. How does that affect his footy? And Jack Rewalt, couldn't see us starting him. Mitch Wallace, I reckon there's a couple of Dogs that, as I mentioned, McLean, Dunkley, who are probably ahead of him that you might want to select. And Jesse Hogan rounds out that list, but you could not select him, surely. So they're all the guys that are 90 plus. And I'd like to know your thoughts on it, but I read those names and it just doesn't get my heart racing at all. Normally there's at least 3 guys that you can say, yeah, I'm pretty confident with that. Do I go a 4th premium in the forward line? Not sure, we'll see. But I'm only got the 2 at the moment. Some of these guys that I wanted to talk about though. Wingard is the obvious one. 88.6 last year, 481k. You would have seen my team reveal the other day. He is in my side at the minute, really vying for position with Dunkley and or McLean for that matter. I really want to see how the Bulldogs shape up their midfield and their centre bounce setup. Wingard has hurt us many, many times, been inconsistent over the journey. He's struggling with a calf injury, I believe, at the moment. So I think, injury aside, if he was having a fantastic pre-season and hit the ground running, I think I'd be pretty confident. But given that Tommy Mitchell's going to miss the bulk of the season, I really think Wingard, the opportunity's there. He'll have a point to prove. He's gone for the opportunity. When you leave a club and you go to a fresh one, generally that could serve as a bit of a kick in the bum. I know he wanted to, but it really does sort of say, look, this is where I need to turn it on. This is where I need to play my best football. And we know how talented he is, but many concerns just over that lingering injury issue. Walters is a guy I'll throw in there. I don't think we can trust him. 87.8 last year, 476k. Oozes class, extremely talented, smart around the goals. I think he's quite good in traffic too. He's shown an ability to run through the middle. Again, without Neil, there's an opportunity. So therefore, I think he needs to be in the conversation. But if he's not getting injured, he's getting suspended. And I think he's just hurt us so many times. Well, certainly last year. He probably falls in that category of a bit of a tease. So you'd have to be pretty brave to go with him. Here's a man that I really want to talk about. And he hurt us last year. And I'm just so confident that at some point he's going to have an outstanding season, an outstanding run of seasons. but it's all a matter of when he gets that opportunity to play his best position. That's Christian Petrarca. Averaged 81.5 last year, 442k. Now, he hurt us last year. We thought he would get a bit more midfield time. Even if he didn't, we probably hoped that he could play a bit like, maybe a Toby Green style, or Jordan De Goey was probably the guy who ended up doing something like that strong, mid-sized forward can do. Really change games and work up the ground and find one-on-ones. Petrarca's one-on-one work was very, very good. Held up very well across the whole competition average, but he just didn't find enough of the ball and he was inaccurate in front of goal. Just didn't happen for him. But this guy is a star in the making. I mean, you guys, if you've watched this and listened to this for some time, you know I'm a big Petrarca fan. It's just a matter of if he can find his way into the midfield. Now, in the match simulation the other week at Melbourne, he spent most of his time through the middle. Obviously, Viney and Jones weren't as involved. I think Oliver wasn't even involved for the whole stint. But whether he can get in there, that's the big question. They've got guys like, as I said, Oliver, Jones, Viney, even Harms played some great footy through there. Brayshaw, of course, how can I forget him? So they've got some real stars in there. It's just a matter of whether they feel like Petrarca, it's time to unleash him through the middle. You watch some of his under-18 tapes. He was a bull back then. He's still a bull. He's a big body. He's good in traffic. I really like his hands in traffic. And the fact that he can still go forward and be damaging there, very appealing. I'm sure it's a discussion the Melbourne staff have often. And I'm sure it's just a matter of where those percentages lie. Do we want him 60% forward, 40% midfield, 80-20 forward? Or do we want him 50-50? Or is it time to go, nah, he's more of a midfielder. He can be more of an asset to the team there. Let's put him 70% midfield and rest him forward, Dangerfield style. Very, very interesting. But I tell you what, watch this space, because to see a guy of Petrarca's ilk at that price, at some stage he's going to explode. He's not going to average 80 to 85 his whole career. No way. So definitely worth looking at. Jack Martin, real interesting as well. We probably don't hear as much about him being at the Gold Coast, but God, he was pumped up early on in his career, wasn't he? Took a while to find his feet, but we've started to see some really good football from him. 80.9 average last year, 439k. I'd be less confident with him. I just think the fact, with Gold Coast, they're just such an uncertainty of a team, aren't they? You just don't quite know what you're going to get with anything, and there haven't been too many gems that have come out of Gold Coast of late, and I'm not sure Martin, he interests me, I think. I mean, he's a guy who's got so much talent. He's played off halfback. He's played up forward. He's had runs through the middle. To be fair, I don't see enough of Gold Coast, and I don't hear enough news out of them to really make a confident decision on him. But we know he just oozes class. He's quick. He's a pretty smart footballer. These are all the things we've heard for some time. When is he going to become that out-and-out star, a game breaker? Does he believe it in himself? I'm not too sure. I mean, if there are any Gold Coast fans out there, let me know. I mean, is this guy ready to explode? Because he's been around a while now. He rarely gets talked about. He's almost like this star-to-be that, God, if he was in Melbourne, he'd get a lot of coverage, a lot of focus. But almost in Gold Coast, we just seem to mention him every now and then. But he's a very talented footballer. And a bit like Petrarca, I think they're different types of players, but he's not going to average around that sort of 80-odd mark his whole career. There's going to be a season where he goes bang, and he does average 90 plus, 95 plus, I'm sure, at some point in his career. Picking that, could take a very bold decision. I'm not sure I'd be taking that risk personally. Here's a name, I'm going to say it, Jack Billings. Yep, I do apologise. I know he hurt us badly last year. 80.6 last year, 437k, that puts him at. And he burnt me as good as anyone. I started with him and I talked him up through the pre-season. In fact, I did a profile not too long ago and sung his praises to an extent. I think if he can find midfield time, which has been discussed, reading an article coming out of St Kilda was that they want to use him through the midfield more, but they do see his value in attack still, a very classy player around goals. So that says to me that I don't see an absolute shift to pure mid, he's still going to have elements of the forward line. But again, it's all about watching those pre-season games and seeing where they line up for the majority. And watch the whole game, look at their stats, you know, find the important snippets and make a decision, because if they're attending numerous centre bounces, that gives you a fair indication. If they're around the stoppage, you know, in close, it's a pretty good indication. If they're starting at half forward, they're out in a wing, you know, they're more of a receiver type, then they're probably not going to get those real in-the-guts sort of type numbers and time. But I really think Billings was a guy that just had a real shocker last year. You know, we talk about, you know, say Devon Smith, I said earlier, just all the good ingredients just came together and compiled an outstanding season. I think all the bad ingredients came together for Billings, you know. Loss of confidence, team going badly, you know, finds himself in the twos. Just, we see players, even the very talented ones, you know, we know Billings has talent. You don't lose that overnight, but you can lose confidence very quickly. And he looked like a guy who just wasn't backing his beautiful left boot. He wasn't playing with that confidence and class that we have seen, that sort of be the man type of mentality. And it was across a lot of St Kilda players. St Kilda had a poor season. Might not be much upside for the Saints next year. Very hard to tell. I thought West Coast and Collingwood would miss the 8. So it's very difficult to predict how sides will go. But Billings individually, I think he's a very, very good player. And if we see some signs that he is playing more midfield through the pre-season, then he has to be considered. I think too often we say, nah, never again. He killed me. I hate Billings. Get rid of him. Never picking this bloke again. I think we can write guys off very quick. And we do see players have down years and bounce back. Now, I think when a guy burns you, there's that added risk of, if you pick him again and he burns you again, well, how stupid are you? I think there's that extra little factor where if we hadn't have considered Billings last year and he wasn't sort of a guy that many of us did go with, then right now we'd be saying, gee, he's underpriced. Jack Billings, gee, not a bad option. Poor year last year, but that's all right. Didn't worry me. Could be a really good value this year. But the fact that he hurt us really makes us go deep inside and say, Jesus, if he gets me again, I'm going to be pulling my hair out and have absolute egg all over my face. So it does take a bit of guts to go back to someone who hasn't served you well, but I think Billings should be considered. Now, a couple of guys just to finish that, look, I wouldn't be considering for your classic, but they're guys that won't get talked about as much, at least from a fantasy point of view, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do average 90 plus, and I think they're definitely guys that you might want to consider for your draft. You know, certainly it can get difficult when you go deep into a draft and all the more obvious players are selected, and sometimes finding those gems. Not that these guys, you know, aren't talked about much, but they're just a little unders what a lot of the other guys are. Brandon Parfitt, averaged 80, 434k. I really like him. You know, I'm a Geelong man. I've watched him up close. Very, very good player. A lot to like about him. And I think that Geelong midfield is going to shape up much different to what we saw last year. Gazza will go forward. I think Dalhouse will go forward. You know, find some of that pressure. I think Dangerfield will be pure midfield is what we've been hearing. And look, it's going to be interesting to see how it does all come together. Even someone like Joel Selwood, talk of him playing a bit elsewhere, you know, lacking the speed, not breaking the tackles as much now. So a guy like Parfitt, although he is still young, and it would be perhaps surprising if he did boost himself into premium status next year, it is not beyond him to boost that 80 to certainly high 80s, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was early 90s. So a guy to think about. And look, this fella, Charlie Curnow, everyone seems to be talking about him. He could be anything. This guy has all the attributes to tear the competition apart. Tell you what, you'd have balls of steel if you selected him. If you went with him with your starting squad, good on you. But gee, going a young key forward, very, very brave. I mean, I was watching his highlights the other day, and gosh, he's an unbelievable specimen, and just can tear games apart. Can he do it consistently? Can he do it to what we will want if we are selecting him in a Carlton side that is going to struggle? There's a lot of maybes. I wouldn't be surprised if he does explode over the next 1 to 2 years. That's not really a brave statement, is it? It's pretty obvious. That average is 77.5, which puts him at 420k. You're not going to be around that for long. I think he's definitely a guy that will average 85 plus. It's just a matter of how involved he can get in what is a weak side, and you know, a lot of pressure will be on him. Coped with it brilliantly well round 1 last year, just tore it up, but it didn't really follow suit after that. I think many were talking about him taking the competition by storm last year. Same can be said for this year, so very interesting to see when those breakout years do happen. Who else have I got on this list? Toby Green. Look, he's very, very cheap for what he can do, isn't he? But unless he can get over that injury, we're going to have to wait and see. If he plays round 1, be hard to say no to. But he has been very, very injury prone, and we'd want to see some good pre-season form. No injuries, no even, thought of an injury. Really looking confident, plenty of minutes into his legs, because he has really struggled to get on the ground. Josh Kennedy, I've seen a few people select him. I think he's about 9% of sides. I mean, I'd have to say no. I know it's nice to look at the reigning premiers and an underpriced key forward who's capable of winning the Coleman and go bang, but last year didn't average great, hence the price tag. But even the year before, I think he was a touch under 90. So it's been a while since we've seen that sort of 96, 97 average from him. So personally, I wouldn't get sucked in. He might be a good guy that you can snare late in the draft as people scramble through the list, and you just know that Kennedy's nicely there. He's definitely unders, but I wouldn't be starting with him. And Dalhouse, similar can be said. I think Dalhouse played his best footy when he was more so pushing up the ground, half-forward flank, pushing in the midfield. It's hard to say. You'd have to keep an eye on him, but I don't see him playing midfield. I think Geelong desperately need tacklers inside 50 to keep the ball in there. We really struggle with that, and I think that's Dalhouse's #1 priority at the moment. Plus, I'm not a big fan of the bloke. Personally, not that I know him, but some of his antics and things like that, I wasn't a massive fan when he came to Geelong, but I hope that he does play some great footy, because once he's at your club, you hope that they do well, but I don't see him being a selection that we should be jumping on board. And I think he's in, an okay amount of teams, maybe 5 or 6% of sides last time I checked. So certainly in a few more than, your run-of-the-mill types. But that's about all I wanted to cover off on. And I say that, but I've been talking for about 20 minutes. So it's been a pretty long video, but I hope you have enjoyed it. I know sometimes when you start talking about quite a few players, a video can drag out, but hopefully you can skip around the video to find the player that you want to hear about. Ideally you listen to the whole thing, but hopefully it's been enjoyable and offered you some sort of insight, or at the very least just got you thinking about a few guys that you hadn't previously thought about. So as I always say, subscribe away. We've pushed well beyond the 1,500 mark in subscribers, which I'm really proud about. I'm hoping to get to 2,000 by, probably some stage throughout the season. You never know what could be possible, but yeah, thanks again for tuning in. Comment away, like the video, give us a subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.